I was curious if you wouldn't mind talking about joy.
Joy?
Yeah, joy. And specifically not cheap happiness, but like true joy, and how that looks on the different stages of a person's spiritual development.
It's such an interesting question. I don't really know if there's an answer that will satisfy you. I don't think there's an answer that will satisfy anyone, really. There are these, I think, relatively cheap ideas about living in the moment. Forget the past. Don't worry too much about the future. It's all these new age gurus like Tola and those who look like him. We have this poet. His recent, his past, of course. Shahriar. It's a guy we talked about some weeks ago. He has this poem that says, زندگانیم و زمین زندان ماست، زندگانی درد بی درمان ماست. That whether he's talking about human beings or any living entity, and let's just say, he's just talking about human beings. That the earth is our prison. زندگانیم و زمین زندان ماست. زندگانی درد بی درمان ماست. That this life is a pain that has no remedy. Existence is a pain that has no remedy. And he's not saying anything new, I'm not really quite sure if you were to ask Gilgamesh what joy would be. I'm not quite sure if he would say it was in having power and being arrogant and spending that power to be mean-spirited, to be crude and cruel. There was certainly also pleasure there. Or it was meeting with Enkidu. Because when you meet with Enkidu, there's a good amount of joy in that, but then there is his death that creates a good amount of sorrow. Or does he find joy in his quest for something that is out of the reach of time? It doesn't decay, it doesn't get destroyed. Or is it when he finds the plant of immortality? Or is it when he writes, his journey on tablets or on the wall? if you look at the nature of desire, how it comes about, and it doesn't matter what the nature of the desire may be, physical, intellectual, emotional, if you want to call it spiritual. Something inside you gets triggered. Whether you see something, whether you hear something, whether all of a sudden you feel an emptiness inside you, and it doesn't really matter, but a desire comes forth. And when you fuel a desire, eventually it turns into a need. The problem with need is that all of a sudden now you have this emotional crisis, which is, there's a desire, it morphs into a want, it then morphs into a need, and it's such an intimate and difficult relationship, because when it gets to a point of need, the suggestion is that you can't survive without satisfying or getting close to what it is that you need. And while that need has not been satisfied, you will write poetry. It's all about longing. It's sad and sorrowful. But in that sadness, you get connected to something that inspires poetry. That for the first time perhaps in your life, you can sit somewhere in seclusion. It's not so much enjoying your own company, but I think it's a sort of alienation that it's not like going and working at Home Depot or In-N-Out, or maybe being in a classroom and saying to yourself, I hate my job, I don't want to be here, That's one kind of alienation. The other is you go down to the shed somewhere that you have built and you say, there is no one out there who can understand me. I'm just going to sit here and just enjoy, looking at trees and the birds and this and that, and hopefully poetry will come. And when poetry, all the muses come together and something inside you kind of shifts and is inspired, you begin to write something. Especially if kind of your intellect and your expression are in the hands of inspiration. What happens is you just write, and it can be quite sad. Bishnu az nechun hekayat mikonad, listen to the reed, because it has a very sad story to tell you. And it's not a happy story. You have 6 books, and they all consist of certain lessons about arrogance, lessons about humility, lessons about forgetfulness, lessons about human potential, human depravity, all these things, but it comes from a place of sorrow. It comes from it's kind of like when you read the Gospel of Judas, where he says, as long as I live in my flesh, I'm always going to be in trouble. I'm always going to find myself unhappy. If there is any joy, I think saying the Gospel of Luke that don't store your treasures down here because thieves will eventually steal, but make sure you store them in, I don't know, in heaven or the kingdom of God or something where the hands of thieves, time, life won't reach. It doesn't really matter who you are, what you are. I think if you happen to be a decent, conscientious human being, seeing all the misery and suffering around you, the idea of having this thing called joy, which is part of the this idea of meritocracy, that you've really struggled, you've sacrificed a lot, and now you deserve this joy that's coming to you, or it's yours. And then arrogance and hubris comes in, and you won't share what little you have with other people. But I think if you happen to kind of look around and see what people are struggling or how they're struggling on a daily basis. The only joy that you can really have that is meaningful, I think, and valuable is kind of lessening other people's struggle. And you can't do it cheaply, sometimes maybe you can. Maybe all you can do is just invite a homeless man or someone who's in need, just take care of this person for an hour or a day, and then that's the best you can do. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about last week, which is I think you have to give meaning to the meaningless nature of existence. There is no other way. The book by Camus, The Plague, and I may have the wrong interpretation of this literature, but my perspective is, people are rejoicing because the assumption is the plague is gone. That the doctor no longer needs to be sad because he finds himself incompetent in the presence of death. That the priest no longer needs to be sad because he no longer needs to explain why the innocent have to suffer, so horrifically, because that's what happens. A journalist no longer has to be outside of life, just looking at life and how miserable it is and just taking notes, and so everybody is kind of engaged in this kind of miserable exercise of figuring out what they need to do in the presence of death and how it's impacting other people. And so there comes a point where, if I remember correctly, Camus suggests that the plague is gone and people are just like in the streets, or they're happy. The cab driver who goes on top of this building and starts shooting at people. And then when he gets caught, he kind of looks at all these people and says, you guys are so dumb. Why do you laugh? Why do you dance? Why do you rejoice? You can never get rid of plague. It's impossible. It's not like you can find joy and never again be touched by human suffering, by disappointment. It doesn't work that way. And I'm sure different people may say different things that may suit you better. And it may be part of my own temperament, really. That I don't, kind of like what Freud had said, that he sees his ideas have a lot of darkness and so little light, like Rembrandt. I'm thinking about the people who have all come before us and their Gospels. Muhammad's Gospel was not received well. And all these Gospels, are basically, philosophies that if you apply them, they'll bring you to a place of stability and joy. Okay? And what happens is, Muhammad engages in almost 30 battles. Where's the joy in that? And when he's gone, there's a division in the tradition. Despite all of his wisdom, you have Jesus in the garden who doubts. But where's the joy in that? You have a guy on the cross who feels completely alone and isolated. He just feels disconnected. And I think part of the difficulty may be just the way we are wired and our existence in flesh. I don't know if we have a soul. I don't really know if there's a God. All I know is that for the past many hundreds, if not thousands of years, there's been this philosophy that argues that there is a spiritual side to human being, that there is God, there is paradise, there is this thing called wisdom, there is this thing called joy, and which to some extent means that whatever it is that you're looking for in physical life will never bring to you the sort of things you really deep down are looking for. You know, people get married to be happy, to be joyous. People have children to be happy, to be joyous. People go into, I mean, all of us in this room are in the teaching profession. You know, we go into the profession because the assumption is, you know, not only can you evolve personally by reading and writing and kind of expressing these ideas to students, but also that students will also benefit from it, you know. But time passes and you realize, well, you know, none of those things are the case, really, you know. And maybe really the trick is, while you're healthy, while you're young, do something that you are immensely passionate about. And you know, that passion creates a certain hope that lives in the future. But to get to this kingdom that lives in the future, you know, maybe you want to do your PhD. Well, the PhD, you know, creates all these images that here you are standing on the stage with your cap and gown, and the president comes and gives you the PhD. You're the first person in your family earning a doctorate. I mean, that's a big deal. But it doesn't end there, because then you say, well, I have a PhD, say, in, I don't know, physics or religious studies. And you say, well, you know, I took a class a long time ago at UC Davis, and I had this inspiring instructor, and that's what I want to do. I want to walk in the classroom and be a professor, teach. You know, so, and then, you know, you go into teaching, and or you say, well, how much do instructors make? And then that leads into, well, maybe I can just find a place in Davis, you know, find a nice little cottage or a home, and then buy nice furniture, and then invite students. And you're thinking, you know, about all the stuff while you're only finishing up your bachelor's degree, you know, or you're in the process of doing your master's degree, but you have all these wonderful images of yourself that live about 10, 15 years down the line. And those images make the suffering, the you know, all the miseries that education creates, it makes it worthwhile. You know, every time you want to just, you know, think about dropping a class or dropping the school completely, you say, Alison, remember, you want to be a professor, you want to buy a house, you want to do this and you want to do that. And those images have enough fuel to keep you going. You know, I don't know what people do if they have no passion, you know, because what usually happens is, unless you become completely numb, you know, where you have to provide for your family and you have to take care of your parents, and you don't really have the privilege of having mental space or energy to sit and, you know, reflect about things, which in some ways you're very lucky because you're always on the go, never thinking about things. You know, something you had said last week about, what about if I go to, you know, some place and help the needy, give them food? And maybe you can find joy in those areas. I don't really know. The other problem, I think, is because things inside us and outside of us are not very stable, your mood changes constantly. And so it may be that, you know, Monday you have found joy. Tuesday you wake up from an afternoon nap and you just find yourself to be in an awful mood. And you were fine just before, closing your eyes and dozing off, but all of a sudden, you wake up and nothing makes any sense. And you say, what the heck happened? Everything was just so in harmony for a day and a half, and all of a sudden it's as if, everything about my life is just awful. I don't know what I'm doing, I have no purpose, I have no direction. I just feel unhappy and miserable. Well, damn, you were joyous for, a day and a half. And I think that's the other thing. The moment you think that you have something, it's taken away. It's interesting that, people like Al Pacino and Robin Williams and I think it's Keith Ledger, all these people, they are so good at what they do when they are on the stage. And I suppose you could say that they're living in the moment, they're profoundly joyous because, there's a script and they can be in character and they do such a great job. But the moment they have to close shop and go home, well, there is no stage to be on. You don't have an audience, you don't have a script. And so you have to figure out what you want to do with your life. And it's a very, very difficult thing. And then, you have someone like Al Pacino who says, I've been, was a drunk for a while, or Robin Williams. You have someone like Heath Ledger who just commit suicide. And even if you wanted to kind of look at Socrates, for example, well, there is no difference. He just came to realize that he just no longer wants to be on the stage. It's no good talking to people. He's tired of hearing his own voice. So whatever joy he had in going to the polis, the city, and talking to the people in the market, but that joy was gone. You consider someone like Jesus in the Gospel of Judas. I think all of us have these moments where we are immensely powerful. Powerful in the sense that you, in some strange way, you have found your niche. Things are working for you. You're extremely happy. It may be that you're going to church and you're crying because something about you or your life has kind of been completely broken. And you're really just weeping intensely, and just the prayers coming out of you. There is, if you pay attention, there is such a sense of completeness about you that you're connected to something. It's rooted in misery, but that misery connects you to something very, very profound. And then once the pressure is released, once you've done enough crying and you've done enough screaming and you've been kind of sad and depressed and lonely in the church, you say, okay, Alison, get up now. I'm tired of being in the church. You go for a walk and you see a few people. 10 minutes later, you go back to being your old self. You're laughing, you're giggling, you're saying ridiculous, things. And I think it's one of those light and darkness, these two worlds we have to live in. If you were to look at the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis, that you're made of two components, two parts. You have the Eve, that's all about life. It's all about the spirit. And you have Adam, which is all about flesh. You go towards Adam. There's a good amount of pleasure there. And the thing about pleasure is that if you're really enjoying something, if something is giving you a good amount of pleasure, you are so fulfilled. You're so joyous, really. Imagine you fall in love with someone and you're holding hands or you're being intimate. There is no other place to go. It is paradise. Everything about your life is complete. And it doesn't matter if you live in a tent or a mansion All you know is that the person next to you fulfills you, all of you. But because your love narrative is a little flawed, but because your narrative about how to be in relationships is a little flawed, because your narrative about what is beauty and what makes someone beautiful is a little flawed, what happens is this fulfillment, the sense of completion or being complete, it only lasts for 2-3 weeks. And that's the thing about the flesh, the Adam part of us, that, kind of like what Dante said, whatever you touch, it just turns into dust. And it's not very difficult to kind of observe this on a daily basis. And then when you're broken, by the Adam part, something about you says, I want something a bit more lasting. This is pathetic. Whether you're in a relationship with your cell phone or a video game or a man or a woman, the truth is they're all going to meet the same fate, which is whether you want to or not, they're all going to expire. And once they expire, you're going to be asking all these difficult questions. Now, if you happen to be relatively mature, you're not going to run away from asking these questions and the way they make you feel, because under pressure you have no choice but to be very, very honest, when you're pressured from inside to kind of witness what you have done. And then you have this Eve side of you all of a sudden jumping up and saying, well, maybe instead of saying to myself that Brad Pitt is attractive or beautiful, maybe I should just figure out what beauty is in itself. It's one of those ridiculous questions that Socrates asks in the dialogues. I didn't ask you about Tesla being beautiful. I was asking what is beauty in itself, And I think he was basically talking about maybe the second commandment in Judaism, that you shouldn't have a graven image of God, that beauty is sacred. The moment you say, well, beautiful is Tesla, beautiful is my children, beautiful is this, you've made a graven image. Allow beauty to remain a mystery, to be unfathomable, to be untouched by the human hand and the human mind. Because when you allow something to be sacred, it means you have to kind of fly towards it. But when you cage it with language, when you cage it with mental images, then you bring it down, and then you kind of lose the opportunity to fly, When you're a novice, I think this Eve part of you that kind of looks at Adam and makes the person feel really, really awful, about what they have done and who they've been or become. They write all these sad poetry. They create all these sad narratives. And you get depressed. And then Eve suddenly goes away. And then you go back to being Adam. But this process of being Adam and Eve have to kind of be continuous for a long, long time. It's like the Enkidu and Gilgamesh wrestling, There comes a point, if you're able to kind of survive this horrifying space, it's like Jacob wrestling with devil until his name is changed to Israel, which means being chained to God, When you become a professional, what happens is you can be in your flesh, all that you want, but you can summon up Eve. You no longer have to wait for it to haphazardly just come about, because something about you is crystallized, is magnetized. You're never going to lose Eve because of the struggle. Something about you has kind of made this humongous space for Eve, the source of inspiration inside you. Now, even if you happen to be one of those Christian desert fathers around the 10th, 11th, 12th century or so, you would think that this guy who's lived in the mountains by himself, always just eating dry bread or pieces of rocks, here and there for 20, 30, 40 years, he has found a relative amount of joy. But it's interesting because all they talk about are these horrifying human tendencies. I mean, there is no women to lust after, and yet their imagination will not leave them alone. And I think that may be the only place where you can find joy, to become mature enough to realize that your body is going to create all these trappings for you. And so is society, and so are your friends. It's, the thing that Aristotle had said some time ago, which was, you can have two kind of aloneness. One that turns you into a beast, and one that turns you into a god. If you've been in a string of relationships, and it doesn't need to be romantic, it could be your relationship with your father is bad, then with your mom is bad, then with your boyfriend is bad, then with your girlfriends are bad. There comes a point where you just kind of, you say, nobody understands me, I'm not going to be with anyone. And so you kind of become a recluse. And then you lose all of your social abilities. You have no social etiquette anymore. You can no longer have the ability to kind of make contact with anyone. That really just turns you into a beast. The other is you learn slowly. You kind of have to figure out what it means to be a human being. What friendship is all about, what life is all about, what is goodness, what is happiness. And then you realize those things can only be attained in solitude. And then slowly you find yourself in a corner of your room. You're lonely or alone. But for the most part, you find yourself content. I mean, it's a very strange phenomenon, because who doesn't want their skin to be touched? Who doesn't want not to look at someone or something that's attractive? Who doesn't want to be listened to? Who doesn't want to hear some interesting stories, Who doesn't want to be moved by someone who's been inspired? And Aristotle says, no, there is no need for any of that stuff. Find a place of joy that lives inside you. But you can only do that if you're able to kind of live in solitude, physical solitude, and then emotional solitude, and then intellectual solitude. And the truth is, that's the core teachings of all these religious philosophers. The kingdom of God is within you. What does that mean? Why am I getting married then? Why am I having children then? Why am I having friends then? Unless they have the ability to lead me to the kingdom of God, which is within me, they're an obstacle. And once they get me to the kingdom of God, do I have any more use for them? I mean, forgive me for rambling on about this, but I think a very short and simple answer to the question is, life is problematic, and your life is far too short to be able to find solutions to all the problems. Find joy the way Job found it, which is, you seek justice, you want answers from existence as to why things are the way they are. In the end, something awesome will enter your life, and will tell you, you're incompetent. You're never going to be wise. You're never going to understand. Find acceptance in the fact that you are profoundly irrelevant, insignificant in the face of this grand thing called the universe. If you can find that, joy will be waiting for you right then and there. You know, and in some ways it may be right, and that's what Job really did. He says, you know what, forgive me, you're absolutely right. I thought I was righteous, I thought I was sinless. No, I am, quite evil. And maybe that's the trick.